Stadium in St. Louis, or one of the famous hotels out in Las Vegas. It just crumbles. It just implodes, and it falls in upon itself. And that's really, I remember on that particular day watching that on the TV monitor and saying to myself, hey, that looks really strange the way it's coming down. I don't think it's necessarily from the plane and the fire from the plane that's doing this.
It almost looks like one of those implosions of buildings that you see, except there is nothing controlled about this.
We made it outside. We made it about a block.
We made it at least 2 blocks, and we started running floor by floor instead of popping out.
It was if they had detonated. If they were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
All the way down. I was watching it and running.
I was making my way to the foot of the World Trade Center. Suddenly, while talking to an officer who was questioning me about my press credentials, we heard a very loud blast, an explosion. We looked up, and the building literally began to collapse before us.
And then the entire top of the building just blew up, and splinters of debris are falling on the street.
Oh my God! Oh my God!
When I began to look at the destruction of the World Trade Center, and especially the Twin Towers, it was astonishing to me how obvious the evidence was that the government account couldn't possibly be correct. Of course, the government maintains that the buildings came down as a result of the impact of jet aircraft resulting jet fuel fires, which weakened or melted the steel and led to a pancake collapse. That's indefensible on every count. The buildings were designed to withstand the impact of the then largest commercial airliners, which were Boeing 707s, very similar in their size and mass and fuel capacity to the 767s that actually hit the building. Most of the fuel from these planes burned up in spectacular fireballs. The fires that resulted were relatively modest. The melting point of steel turns out to be 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit. The highest temperature you can acquire with a jet fuel-based fire, which is principally kerosene incidentally, is 1,000 degrees lower under ideal circumstances. The billowing black clouds indicated these were oxygen-starved or deprived fires that were burning much lower temperatures. In fact, the estimates on all sides are those fires were only running about 500 degrees Fahrenheit, much too low, obviously, for the steel to have melted or even to have weakened, since Underwriter's laboratory had certified the steel up to 2,000 degrees for 3 to 4 hours. The fire in the South Tower burned only around an hour, in the North an hour and a half, so the fires were too low and too brief in duration to have caused the steel to even weaken. If the steel had weakened, there would have been asymmetrical sagging, it would have been gradual, and you wouldn't have had enough dynamic energy to cause a collapse in any case. The whole theory of a pancake collapse is a physical impossibility.
Molten metal in the basements of all 3 buildings.
Right.
And yet all scientists now reasonably agree that the fires were not sufficiently hot to melt the steel. So what is this molten metal? It's a direct evidence for the use of high temperature explosives such as thermite. Thermite produces molten iron as an end product.
Okay. We appreciate your coming on, even if I don't understand your theories. We appreciate you trying to explain them. Thanks.
These core columns were discovered after the collapse. The angled cut occurs in exactly the manner that shaped charges slice through steel beams to control the way they fall. Notice the hardened, once liquid metal. Was thermite used with the shaped charge?
The way we do this is by cutting the beam at an angle, which, through a series of beams cut at the same angle, will tend to make the building shift over and walk.
Building 7, I'm not familiar with what it looks like or where it is.
That's where the command center was. I don't know that much about the structural issues on that building, other than that an intense fire occurred there as a result of debris and such coming from the towers, and that's why that building came down.
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, you know, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
One of the keys to what happened on 9/11 is what caused Building 7 of the World Trade Center to collapse. Many of you are going to go, Building 7, what was that? That was a 47-story steel and glass office building that just totally collapsed down into its own foundation about 5:20 on the afternoon of 9/11. It was not hit by airplanes, didn't have any devastating fires in it. It just collapsed down after the building owner, Larry Silverstein, said, well, I told the fire department to pull it, and they pulled it, and we stood there and watched the building come down.
And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
Well, industry slang, pulling it means controlled demolition. If Building 7 was brought down by controlled demolition, then why is it so preposterous to assume that perhaps the Trade Center towers were brought down by controlled demolition?
You hear that? Keep your eye on that building. It'll be coming down soon. It'll be coming down soon.
What we know for sure is that these buildings were pre-wired for demolition, and that the plane hits were simply created as a distraction in the way a magician distracts you by showing you one thing while pulling something out of a hat while you're not looking. In the same way, they conditioned us to think that the demolitions were actually collapses caused by plane hits and fires, when we now know that they were not. Building 7, which is obviously a controlled demolition, the collapse of this 47-story building in 7 seconds, for no reason at all, a couple of small fires and a couple of little nicks on the side of the towers. That's a ridiculous story that anybody can see through. And then when you hear that the overinsured landlord of 6 weeks, Mr. Larry Silverstein, basically confessed to pulling it or taking it down in a controlled demolition on national television, no less. I mean, you really see that the whole thing is obviously an inside job. So I think Building 7 is sort of the first thing that we need to wave in the face of everybody who hasn't figured this out yet.
On September 11th, there was worldwide live television coverage, and the coverage continued throughout the day. The interesting thing is that at 10 p.m. London time, which is 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, they reported that the Salomon Brothers building, Building 7, had collapsed. The only problem is Building 7 didn't collapse until 5:20 p.m. New York time.
Now, more on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago I was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing. And indeed it has. Apparently that's only a few hundred yards away from where the World Trade Center towers were. And it seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent, Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and